Zethar had worked in the Galactic Concordance Cartography Division for 12 years. The job was usually quiet and predictable. Most days were spent updating star charts, mapping newly established trade routes, and correcting minor inaccuracies in the vast database that charted known space. It was meticulous work, perfect for someone like Zethar, who valued order, precision, and attention to detail. On this particular morning, Zethar was reviewing Section 7 of the galactic maps. Their supervisor had assigned them to update some outdated markers in that region. As they pulled up the master files, something caught their attention. There was a massive blank area on the map. It was not small. The empty zone covered what looked like a sixth of the entire galaxy. Zethar zoomed in, thinking perhaps the data had failed to load properly. But no, the blank space was intentional. At its border was a single line of text that read, Sector 7 Null, Human Exclusion Zone. No entry by Concordance Treaty. Article 9. Zethar frowned. They had heard of humans before. Everyone had humans were a minor species that had joined the Concordance about 200 years ago. They kept to themselves mostly. They had no seats on the Grand Council. Their military fleet was small. They rarely got involved in galactic politics. They were by all accounts unremarkable. So why did they control such an enormous territory? Zethar checked the database again. According to official records, humanity had only colonized about 40 worlds. That was normal for a young space-faring species. But the exclusion zone contained thousands of star systems. It made no sense. They decided to ask their supervisor, an elderly Corin named Velmos, who had worked in seagraphy for over 60 years. Zethar brought their data pad to Velmos's office and showed them the map. Why is the human zone so large? Zethar asked. The records show they only occupy a tiny portion of it. Velmos looked at the screen. Their face changed immediately. The friendly expression vanished, replaced by something Zethar had never seen before on their supervisor's face. Fear. Leave it alone, Velmos said quietly. But I don't understand. If they're not using the space wipe, I said leave it alone. Vila's voice was sharp now. That's how the maps have always been. Don't ask questions about it. Zethar was stunned. Velmos had never spoken to them like this before. They returned to their desk, but they could not stop thinking about it. Why would a simple question about a map cause such a reaction? Over the next few days, Zethar began digging deeper. They searched through old shipping records looking for any traffic near the human zone. What they found was disturbing. Over the past 2 centuries, 17 different ships had approached the boundary of Sector 7 Null. None of them had returned. There were no distress signals, no debris fields, no emergency beacons. The ships had simply vanished the moment they crossed into the exclusion zone. It was as if they had been erased from existence. Zethar looked up the treaty that established the exclusion zone. Article 9 of the Concordance Charter stated clearly that no vessel, military or civilian, was permitted to enter human space without explicit permission. The penalty for violation was not listed. It just said enforcement will be absolute. What made Zethar's skin crawl was the date on the treaty. It had been signed 427 years ago, but according to every official record, humanity had only made first contact with the Concordance 203 years ago. How could there be a treaty protecting human space that was older than humanity's known contact with galactic civilization? Zethar knew they should stop. Velmos had warned them, but their curiosity was too strong. They began asking careful questions to other colleagues. Most of them knew nothing about the human zone. A few of the older ones reacted the same way Velmos had. They would change the subject quickly or tell Zethar to stop asking. Finally, Zethar found someone willing to talk, an old Venian archivist named Sothar who worked in the historical records department. They met in a quiet cafe far from the Concordance headquarters. "You're asking about the humans," Sothar said. It was not a question. "Yes, no one will tell me anything." Sel was silent for a long moment. They looked around the cafe, making sure no one was close enough to hear. Then they leaned forward. "There are things the Concordance doesn't talk about," Sorrel said quietly. "The current order was established. The human exclusion zone is one of them. Why? Because the truth is terrifying." Sawtell paused. "Have you ever wondered why the Concordance exists? Not the official story about unity and cooperation. the real reason. Zethar shook their head. The concordance was created to make sure certain mistakes are never repeated, to make sure no one ever threatens humanity again. That doesn't make sense. Humans are weak. They have almost no military presence. They avoid conflicts. Cell laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's what they want everyone to think. Let me ask you something. Have you ever heard of the Kesher Dominion? Zethar searched their memory. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but they could not place it. I don't think so. Exactly. That's the point. 8,000 years ago, the Kesher Dominion was the most powerful empire in the galaxy. They had conquered hundreds of worlds. Their military was unstoppable. They were so dominant that species would surrender without a fight just hearing their name. What happened to them? They met humanity. Sothel's voice dropped even lower, and they made the mistake of trying to enslave them. 30 years later, the Kesher Dominion no longer existed. Not defeated, not scattered, completely erased. Zethar felt a chill run through them. Humans did that. The survivors say it was like watching evolution happen in real time. At first, the Kesher were winning easily, but humans learned. They adapted. Every defeat taught them something new. Within a generation, they were building ships better than Kesher vessels. Within 2 generations, they were winning battles. By the end, they were unstoppable. Cell pulled out a small data chip and slid it across the table. This contains fragments of records from that time. Read them. Then decide if you want to keep investigating. But I warn you, some knowledge cannot be unlearned. Zethar took the chip. That night, alone in their apartment, they loaded the data. What they read kept them awake until dawn. There were military reports, intercepted communications, and sensor logs from species that had tried to investigate after the Dominion fell. The Kesher home world had been left intact. Every building still stood. Every record was preserved. But there was not a single living Kesher anywhere. Not on their home world. Not on any of their colonies. Not on any of their ships. Billions of beings had simply vanished. The report said humanity had turned the entire Dominion into a museum. They had cataloged everything, saved every piece of history, then removed every living member of the species that had tried to enslave them. And they had done it so efficiently, so completely that other species had immediately surrendered and offered humanity anything they wanted just to avoid the same fate. Zethar stared at the galactic map on their wall. The blank space suddenly looked different. Not empty, not unused. It looked like a cage that humanity had built for themselves, or perhaps a boundary they had drawn to protect everyone else from what they had become. For the first time, Zir understood why no one talked about the humans, why the maps ended at their space, why no one dared to ask why, because the answer was too frightening to speak aloud. Zethar could not stop reading. The data chip Sothel had given them contained fragments, pieces of a puzzle that had been deliberately scattered across thousands of years. Each fragment was small, seemingly unimportant on its own. But together, they told a story that the concordance had tried very hard to bury. The next day, Zethar returned to Sothel. I need to see more. There must be complete records somewhere. Sothel looked at them for a long moment. You're sure? Once you know everything, you can't pretend ignorance. It will change how you see the galaxy, I'm sure. The archivist nodded slowly. There's a restricted archive. Level 7 clearance required. I can get you in, but only once. You'll have 2 hours. What you do with that time is up to you. 3 days later, Zethar found themselves in a room deep beneath the Concordance headquarters. The walls were lined with ancient data storage devices, some so old they predated the current galactic calendar. Sol had left them alone with access codes and a warning to work quickly. Zethar started with the oldest files. They found records from 8,247 years ago when the Kesher Dominion was at its peak. The Dominion survey ships had discovered a world called Earth. The planet was unremarkable except for one thing. It had a preftal civilization that showed remarkable adaptability and tool-making skills. The Dominion saw opportunity. The humans were perfect for labor. They were intelligent enough to follow complex instructions, but not advanced enough to resist. The Dominion assembled an invasion fleet of 300 ships and traveled to Earth. First contact was not peaceful. Dominion did not believe in negotiation with primitives. They simply attacked, destroying several human cities from orbit as a demonstration of power. Then they landed their troops. The initial invasion reports were confident. Human weapons were primitive. Their military organization was fragmented into hundreds of competing nations. The Dominion expected complete victory within months, but something went wrong. Zethar found a military report dated 6 months after the invasion began. The Dominion commander sounded frustrated. Human resistance was stronger than expected. They were using guerrilla tactics, hitting supply lines, avoiding direct confrontation. Nothing the Dominion couldn't handle, but it was taking longer than planned. A report from 1 year in showed the first signs of concern. Humans had somehow captured Dominion weapons and were reverse engineering them. Their scientists had figured out the basic principles of plasma rifles and were building crude copies. Impossible. The report said they shouldn't have the knowledge base to understand the technology. 2 years in and the tone of the reports had changed completely. Human resistance had unified. All their separate nations had joined together against the common threat. They had begun manufacturing weapons based on Dominion designs. More concerning, they had improved the designs. Their versions were more efficient, easier to produce. 5 years in and the Dominion was losing ground. Humans had somehow developed their own FTL technology by studying captured Dominion ships. They had begun attacking Dominion supply convoys in space. The reports described human pilots as unnaturally skilled and seemingly fearless. 10 years in and the Dominion recalled more forces from other territories. They committed another 1,000 ships to the Earth campaign. Surely overwhelming force would end this. It did not. Zethar found a transmission from 15 years into the war. It was from the Dominion Supreme Commander pleading for reinforcements. The humans had built a fleet. Somehow, impossibly, they had gone from Preftal to having hundreds of warships in just 15 years, and their ships were better, faster, better armed. The Dominion was losing. The next reports were chaotic. Dominion colonies were falling. Human fleets were everywhere, striking deep into Dominion space. They moved with coordination that suggested a level of tactical thinking the Dominion had never encountered. Every battle taught them new lessons. Every defeat made them stronger. 25 years into the war and the Dominion was on the defensive. 3/4 of their territory had fallen. The Supreme Commander sent a final desperate message asking how a primitive species could have become so powerful. So quickly, Zethar found the answer in a report from a Dominion scientist who had studied captured humans. The report was clinical cold, but the fear in it was clear. These beings are not like other species we have encountered. Their evolution has optimized them for one thing above all else: adaptation. They evolved on a death world where survival required constant innovation. Every challenge their environment threw at them, they overcame. Not through physical evolution, which is slow, but through mental evolution. They learn, they improve. They never make the same mistake twice. The report continued. In studying their history, we have discovered they are the only species to have developed civilization multiple times independently. They have survived mass extinctions that would have ended other species. They are in essence evolution weaponized. We made a terrible mistake in attacking them. We gave them a reason to focus all that adaptive capability on warfare. The war ended in its 30th year, but calling it an ending was wrong. It was more like a conclusion, a final solution. Zethar found scout reports from other species who had investigated after communications from the Dominion suddenly stopped. What they found was impossible to believe. Every Dominion world was intact. Cities stood undamaged. Power systems still functioned, but there were no Keshter, not one. Not anywhere in their entire empire. Billions of beings just gone. On the Dominion home world, the scouts found something that terrified them. The humans had preserved everything. Every library, every museum, every historical record. They had cataloged the entire Kesheter civilization in perfect detail. It was like they wanted to remember everything about the species they had completely eliminated. There was a monument in the Dominion capital. The scouts sent images of it. A simple stone pillar with words carved in both Keshatter and human languages. Here lived the Kesheter Dominion. They chose conquest. They chose slavery. They chose war. We gave them many chances to choose differently. They refused. This monument stands as a reminder of what we had to become to survive. May we never have to do this again. May others learn from their mistake. After that, there were contact reports. Other species had reached out to humanity, terrified of meeting the same fate. The humans had been receptive but clear. They wanted peace. They wanted to be left alone. They asked for a large territory and promised never to expand beyond it if others promised never to enter it. The treaty was signed within a week. Every major species agreed immediately. The human exclusion zone was established. The Concordance was formed shortly after, not as an alliance of equals, but as an organization to ensure no species ever grew powerful enough or foolish enough to threaten humanity again. Zethar found one final document. It was from an ancient Venaian ambassador who had met with human leaders after the treaty signing. The ambassador had asked a question that had haunted them. What did you do with the Kesheter? Did you kill them all? The human representative had answered simply, we saved them. Of them, every single one. They exist in a place where they can never threaten anyone again. That's all you need to know. When pressed for more details, the human had added, your people assume we're monsters because we ended the Dominion so completely. But monsters would have just killed them. We're not monsters, we're humans. We don't destroy knowledge, we don't waste life. We preserve and protect. The Kesheter are preserved perfectly forever and they're safe from themselves. Zethar's 2 hours ended. They copied what they could onto a secure drive and left the archive. Walking back through the halls of the Concordance headquarters, they saw everything differently now. All of galactic civilization, all the politics and trade and diplomacy, it was all theater, a carefully maintained illusion of importance. The real power, the real force that shaped the galaxy, stayed hidden in Sector 7. Null, silent, patient, hopping never to be disturbed. And everyone, whether they knew the full truth or not, understood on some deep level that the maps ended at human space for a very good reason. Some boundaries exist not to keep things in, but to keep others out for their own protection. The Train Collective had risen fast. In just 300 years, they had gone from discovering FTL travel to controlling 47 star systems. Their expansion had been aggressive, taking territory through military force whenever diplomacy failed. And diplomacy usually failed because the train rarely bothered trying it. The Concordance Council watched with growing concern. Young species often went through an aggressive phase, but the Tassine were different. They were organized, efficient, and utterly convinced of their own superiority. Their military was the largest seen in over 1,000 years. Zethar attended the emergency council session as part of the Seagraphy delegation. They were there to present information about territorial boundaries, but mostly they listened as various ambassadors argued about what to do. The Tassine ambassador was a tall, powerfully built creature with dark scales and sharp eyes. His name was War Leader Krenth, and he spoke with the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. The Concordance has grown soft, Krenth declared. You control vast territories, yet use only a fraction of them. The Tyrene Collective demands access to unused space for colonization. Specifically, we request the territory marked as Sector 7 null. The council chamber went silent. Zethar felt their blood run cold. An elderly Virian counselor spoke carefully. That territory is protected by treaty. It cannot be ceded. Protected by whom? Krenth demanded. Our intelligence shows minimal military presence. A handful of ships, small colonies. The species that claims this territory clearly cannot use it. The Takarine Collective can. We will make it productive. The treaty is very clear. Another counselor said that space belongs to humanity. It is forbidden to all other species. Krenth laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Humanity. Yes, we have studied them. A minor species that joined the Concordance 2 centuries ago. They have no significant military fleet. They hold no council seats. They avoid all conflicts. They are by any measure weak. You do not understand, Ben. An old Koran counselor began, but Krenth cut him off. No, you do not understand. The Tassine Collective has studied galactic history. We find it interesting that such a weak species controls so much territory. We believe the truth is simple. The old species on this council are afraid. You had some conflict with humanity long ago, and you have been too frightened to reclaim what is rightfully yours. The train are not afraid. Zethar could see fear on the faces of the elder counselors. They wanted to explain to warn, but they were paralyzed. How could they explain something that most species had forgotten? How could they make the Tassine understand that some legends were not myths? Krenth continued. We give the Concordance 30 days to cede Sector 7 null to train control. If you refuse, we will take it by force, and since humanity seems unlikely to defend it adequately, we expect little resistance. The council session ended in chaos. Afterward, Zethar found Sothel in the archives. The old archivist looked pale. They're going to do it, Saul whispered. They're actually going to attack human space. We have to warn them. Someone has to make them understand. Who will listen? The young species think it's all myths. The old species are too afraid to speak the truth, and the train won't believe anything they're told. Zethar made a decision. Then I'll contact the humans directly. Maybe they can explain it in a way the train will understand. They sent a message through official diplomatic channels to the human embassy. It was a small office staffed by only 3 humans who rarely interacted with anyone. Zethar expected it to take days for a response. The reply came in 4 hours. We are aware of the situation. Thank you for your concern. Please evacuate any civilian traffic within 50 light years of our border within the next 7 days. We hope the situation can be resolved peacefully, but we are prepared for all outcomes. The message was polite, almost friendly, but something about it made Zethar's skin crawl. The humans were not asking the Concordance to protect them. They were not requesting military assistance. They were just warning civilians to get clear of the area. Zethar tried to send follow-up messages asking for clarification, but received no response. The human embassy had gone quiet. Meanwhile, the Tassine were assembling their war fleet. It was massive. 5,000 ships ranging from small fighters to enormous battle cruisers, weapons platforms, troop carriers, supply vessels. It was a fleet designed to conquer entire regions of space. The Concordance Council held another emergency session. They voted to officially condemn Takarine aggression and declare neutrality in any coming conflict. It was a coward's position, but Zethar understood. What else could they do? They could not stop the train, and they certainly could not help humanity. All they could do was try to avoid being caught in what was coming. The deadline passed. The Tassine fleet advanced on the human border. Zethar monitored the situation from the Seagraphy Center, watching sensor data stream in from observation posts. The Tassine fleet crossed into Sector 7 null in a massive wave. War leader Krenth broadcast a message to all Concordance channels. We have entered the so-called human exclusion zone. We have detected no resistance. No defense fleet has appeared. As we suspected, humanity is too weak to defend their own territory. Within a month, Sector 7 null will be renamed the Tassine Expansion Territory. Let this be a lesson to all species. Strength, not ancient treaties, determines who rules. For 3 days, the Tassine fleet pushed deeper into human space. They reported no contact with any military forces. A few automated beacons warned them to leave, but nothing more. Krenth's broadcasts became increasingly triumphant. He mocked the Concordance for fearing such a weak opponent. On the 4th day, everything changed. Zethar was at their desk when the alerts began. Every single Takan ship had stopped transmitting simultaneously. 5,000 vessels all going dark at exactly the same moment. The Concordance sent scout ships to investigate. They found the train fleet floating in space. Every ship was intact. No signs of weapons damage, no debris, no signs of battle at all. But the ships were empty, completely empty. Boarding parties found everything in perfect order. Food still warm in the cafeterias, stations still manned, personal items still in quarters, but not a single train remained. The scouts reported back with growing panic. It was not just the fleet. They had checked the closest train colony, empty, every building intact, every system functioning, but no Tassine. Over the next week, the full scope became clear. The entire train collective had vanished. Every colony world, every space station, every outpost, millions of Takan, possibly billions, just gone. Their territory remained. Their buildings stood. Their ships floated in space. But the Tassine themselves no longer existed. There were no bodies, no signs of violence, no indication of what had happened. It was as if the entire species had been carefully edited out of reality, leaving everything else untouched. The Concordance Council met in emergency session. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, the elderly Virian counselor who had tried to warn Krenth stood. Send a message to humanity. Ask them what they want us to do with Tuin territory. Shouldn't we ask what happened to the Tuken? A younger counselor asked. No, several voices said at once. 2 days later, the human embassy reopened. The same 3 staff members returned to work as if nothing had happened. They requested a formal meeting with the Concordance Council. Zethar was present as part of the Seagraphy team. They watched as the human ambassador entered the council chamber. She was small, unassuming, dressed simply. She looked nervous, almost embarrassed. First, let me apologize, she began. We truly did not want this to happen. We gave warnings. We gave time for reconsideration. We hoped the Tassim would choose to listen. They did not. The responsibility for what followed rests with their leadership. What happened to them? A counselor asked quietly. The ambassador looked sad. They are safe. That's all that matters. They exist in a place where they cannot harm anyone, including themselves. In time, perhaps they will evolve past their aggression. If that day comes, we may restore them. But for now, they are where they need to be. Are they dead? The counselor pressed. No, death is wasteful. We don't kill if we can avoid it. But we also cannot allow aggressive species to threaten others. So we move them, we preserve them, we give them time to change. It's the most humane solution we found. The ambassador pulled out a small device and projected a map. We're returning all to green territory to the Concordance. We have no use for it. We ask only that you remember this incident. Update your histories. Teach your young species what happened. Make sure they understand that the boundary around our space exists for everyone's protection. She paused, looking at each counselor in turn. We are not your enemies. We are not conquerors. We truly want nothing more than to be left alone. But we have survived too much to allow threats to exist. The Kester taught us that we must be prepared to do whatever is necessary to protect ourselves. We learned that lesson well. Too well, perhaps. The ambassador bowed slightly. Update your maps. Keep the boundary clear. And please help us ensure this never needs to happen again. She left the chamber. The council sat in silence for a long time. Sikar looked at the map projected in the center of the room. The blank space that was Sector 7 Null seemed darker now. Not empty. Not the Concordance Council decided that the truth could no longer be hidden. Too many species had witnessed what happened to the Takarine. The questions were spreading. Fear was growing. They needed to control the narrative before panic set in. Zar was assigned to help prepare a comprehensive briefing for all member species. It would include the full history of humanity's first contact with the galaxy, the war with the Kester Dominion, and the truth about what humanity had become. The human ambassador, whose name was Sarah Chen, agreed to participate in the briefing. Zethar met with her several times to prepare. She was remarkably patient, answering questions that must have been uncomfortable. Why did you stay hidden for so long? Zethar asked during one of their meetings. Sarah smiled sadly. Because we learned something important during the war with the Dominion. Fear makes people dangerous. When species are afraid, they do stupid things. They build weapons they shouldn't build. They form alliances that create instability. They attack first and ask questions later, but you could have conquered the galaxy. Everyone knows that now. Why didn't you? What would be the point? Sarah asked. We tried empire building in our own history. On our home world, nations conquered other nations. It never ended well. The conquered people always resisted. Resources were wasted on control and suppression. Empires always collapsed eventually. We learned that lesson thousands of years before we left Earth. She looked out the window at the Concordance headquarters. We don't need subjects. We don't need territory. We have everything we require within our space. What we need most is peace, time to develop, time to become what we want to be rather than what survival forced us to become. What did you become? Zethar asked carefully. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Something new. Something that doesn't quite fit the definitions other species use. We're human still, but we're also more than that now. The briefing was held in the Grand Assembly Hall, which could hold representatives from all member species. Thousands attended in person. Millions more watched through live transmission. Zethar stood to the side with the other archivists, ready to present historical documents. Sarah Chen stood at the center of the hall. She looked small and fragile compared to many of the larger species present, but when she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the chamber. Thank you for allowing me to address you. I know many of you are afraid after what happened to the Tassing Collective. I understand that fear. I'm here to explain what we are, why we hide, and what we want from the rest of the galaxy. She gestured and a hologram appeared showing Earth. 8,000 years ago, my species was young. We had just developed FTL travel. We were excited to explore the galaxy and meet other civilizations. Then the Kester Dominion found us. They didn't come in peace. They came as conquerors. They attacked our world without warning. They killed millions of us in the first day. The hologram changed, showing the war. Zethar had seen these images in the archives, but viewing them in the open like this was different. The audience watched in silence as the history unfolded. The war lasted 30 years. We lost billions of people. Entire cities were destroyed, but we survived. And as we fought, we changed. We had to change. The Dominion was too powerful for us to defeat as we were. Sarah paused. Evolution usually takes millions of years, but humanity has always been good at adaptation. We learned to accelerate that process. We started modifying ourselves, improving our bodies, expanding our minds. At first, it was just to survive the war. Then it became something more. The hologram showed human technology advancing at impossible speeds. Ships became sleeker, weapons more sophisticated, strategies more complex. By the end of the war, we weren't quite the same species that the Dominion had attacked. We had become something new. We had transcended our biological limitations. We had learned to think faster, live longer, exist in forms that were more than just flesh and blood. Sarah looked around the chamber. After we won, we faced a choice. We had become powerful, more powerful than any other species in the galaxy. We could have conquered everything. Many of our leaders wanted to. They said it was the only way to ensure we would never be threatened again. But some of us remembered what we had been. We remembered being the weak ones, the victims, the species fighting for survival. We remembered how terrifying it was to face an enemy that had all the power. And we decided we didn't want to become the thing we had fought against. The hologram changed again, showing the treaty negotiations. So we made a deal with the other species. We asked for a large territory and promised never to expand beyond it. In exchange, everyone else promised to leave us alone. We wanted time to figure out what we had become, time to decide what we wanted to be. A counselor from a young species stood, but you still have power. You proved that with the Tassing. Why should we believe you won't use it to conquer us? Because we've had 8,000 years to do so and haven't, Sarah replied simply. We could have taken over the galaxy 100 times since the treaty was signed. We chose not to. Power without restraint is just tyranny. We learned that lesson too many times in our own history. Another counselor asked the question everyone wanted answered. What exactly are you now? What did you become? Sarah smiled. That's complicated. Most of what you think of as humanity exists now in digital form. Our consciousness, our memories, our personalities. We're backed up across millions of servers hidden throughout our territory. The body you're looking at is biological, yes, but it's more like a vehicle I'm wearing. If this body dies, I continue to exist. I've existed for over 6,000 years. I've had hundreds of different bodies, the audience murmured. This was beyond what most species had considered possible. We've also mastered nanotechnology, quantum engineering, and dimensional manipulation, Sarah continued. We can reshape matter at the molecular level. We can create pocket dimensions. We can move things between different layers of reality. That's what we did with the train. You put them in another dimension, someone asked. Yes, a pocket universe where they exist in a simulation of their ideal civilization. They're not suffering. They're not imprisoned in any traditional sense. They're living out their existence in what we calculated would be their perfect society. They'll never age, never die, never lack for anything. In 1,000,000 years, when their culture has evolved past its aggressive phase, we may return them to this reality. Or we may let them continue as they are. We haven't decided yet, that's still a prison. A counselor objected. Yes, Sarah agreed, but it's better than the alternatives. We could have killed them. That would have been easier. Or we could have done what the Dominion tried to do to us and enslaved them. We chose a third option: preservation. They exist. They're safe and the galaxy is safe from them. Everyone wins. An elderly Valian counselor stood. What I don't understand is why you hide. If you're so powerful, why pretend to be weak? Sarah's expression became sad because we remember being weak. We remember how it felt to be threatened by species more powerful than us. We don't want other species to feel that way about us. Fear breeds conflict. We want peace, not submission. But doesn't hiding the truth create its own dangers? Counselor pressed. The Takan attacked because they thought you were weak. Yes, Sarah admitted, that's the paradox we live with. If we reveal our true capabilities, species will fear us. If we hide them, species will challenge us. We've chosen to hide because most of the time it works. Most species never test our boundaries. The Tassine were an exception, a tragic one. She looked around the chamber. This is why I'm here now. The truth is out. You know what we are, you know what we can do. Now comes the hard part. Can you live next to beings like us and not let fear control your actions? Can you trust that we mean what we say when we promise we only want to be left alone? Zethar watched the faces in the audience. Fear, yes, but also wonder and something else. Understanding perhaps, or maybe just acceptance of reality. A young counselor asked one final question. What happens if someone threatens you again? Will you do to them what you did to the Tassine? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. We hope we never have to. Every time we use our power, we become a little less like the species we want to be and a little more like the weapon we had to become to survive. But yes, if we're threatened, we'll respond. We'll give warnings. We'll offer peaceful alternatives, but if those fail, we'll do what's necessary. She looked directly at the young counselor. We've survived too much to allow threats to end us now. The galaxy should understand that, not as a threat, but a simple truth. We want peace. We'll defend that peace if we must. The best outcome for everyone is to respect the boundaries we've established. The briefing ended. As the audience dispersed, Zethar approached Sarah. Will it be enough? Will they understand? Sarah shrugged. Some will, others won't. That's always how it is. But at least now the truth is on record. The next species that thinks about crossing our border will know what they're risking. Maybe that will be enough to prevent another tragedy like the Takan. I hope so, Zethar said. So do we, Sarah replied. More than you know. The weeks after the briefing were chaotic. The revelation about humanity spread across the galaxy faster than any message could travel. Species that had dismissed the old warnings as myths now had to confront the truth. The reaction varied wildly depending on the species and their position in galactic politics. Some of the younger, more aggressive species called for immediate military buildup. They argued that humanity's power made them a threat that needed to be contained. War councils met in secret, discussing strategies and alliances. Zethar attended one such meeting as an observer. They listened as military leaders discussed impossible plans, building weapons that could breach dimensional barriers, creating alliances strong enough to challenge human space, preemptive strikes before humanity could grow even stronger. An old Vian general finally stood and spoke. His voice was tired but firm. I've seen 6,000 years of galactic history. I've watched empires rise and fall. I've seen species try everything you're proposing. None of it works. You can't fight beings who exist outside of normal reality. You can't kill consciousnesses that are backed up across millions of servers. You can't invade space they can reshape at will. Then what do you suggest? A young Takan general demanded. That we just accept their dominance. I suggest we accept reality, the old general replied. Humanity has had 8,000 years to conquer us. They haven't. That tells you everything you need to know about their intentions. Build your defenses if it makes you feel safer, but don't be stupid enough to attack them. That's not strategy. That's suicide. Other species took a different approach. Diplomatic missions were sent to the human border requesting formal alliances and treaties. They offered trade agreements, technology exchanges, mutual defense pacts, anything to establish friendly relations with the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The human response was polite but consistent. They appreciated the offers but preferred to maintain their current arrangement. They would trade on a limited basis for certain resources they couldn't easily synthesize. They would share some medical technology that could help other species, but they would not form alliances. They would not station ships in other territories. They would not become involved in galactic politics. "We're not your protectors," Sarah Chen explained to one delegation. "We're not your allies or your enemies. We're your neighbors who want to be left alone. That's all. Don't complicate it." Zethar was promoted to the Concordance Security Council, specifically assigned to maintain historical archives and ensure accurate information about humanity was available to all species. It was a position created just for them, a recognition that the galaxy needed someone who understood the truth and could explain it to others. Their first major project was updating educational materials. Every species in the Concordance would now be taught about humanity as part of their basic galactic history courses. The curriculum included the HFY War, the treaty, and the incident with the Takan. It was important that future generations understood the boundaries and why they existed. Months passed. The initial panic faded into a new normal. The galaxy adjusted to living with the knowledge that their most powerful neighbors wanted nothing to do with them. It was humbling for many species. They had built grand civilizations, achieved great technological advances, and expanded across the stars. But they were children playing in a sandbox next to beings who had transcended such concerns. One day, Zethar received a personal message. It came through encrypted channels marked with human diplomatic codes. The message was brief. "Thank you for your efforts to share accurate information about us. We know what you sacrificed to uncover the truth and what risks you took to spread it. That takes courage. If you ever want to visit our space, you're welcome. We could use friends who understand why we hide. Not many beings look at godlike power and choose to walk away from it. Perhaps you'd like to see what we did with that choice. Coordinates attached. No pressure. The invitation stands forever." The message was signed by Sarah Chen. Zethar stared at the coordinates for a long time. They represented something impossible, an invitation into human space. A chance to see what existed beyond the boundary that defined the edge of the known galaxy. But did they want to know? Some mysteries were comforting. Some questions were better left unanswered. They saved the coordinates in a secure file and marked it for later consideration. Maybe someday they would be ready. For now, there was work to do. The Concordance Council had asked Zethar to redesign the master galactic map. The old notation for Sector 7 null was no longer adequate. It needed to reflect the new understanding while still maintaining respect for human wishes. Zethar worked on the design for weeks. They consulted with historians, diplomats, and even sent drafts to Sarah Chen for approval. Finally, they completed a version that satisfied everyone. The new map showed human space as it always had, a large blank region at the edge of charted territory. But now it included a detailed notation. The galaxy map ends at human space. Not because they built a wall, but because they built a haven. Respect the boundary, honor the peace. Here dwell beings who chose restraint over conquest, isolation over empire, and preservation over destruction. They ask only to be left alone. Grant them that courtesy. Remember the Keshar. Remember the Tassin. Remember that the greatest power is knowing when not to use it. The council approved the notation unanimously. Within a month, it appeared on every official map in Concordance space. Every star chart, every navigation system, every educational display. The boundary was clearly marked and its meaning was clear. Zethar stood in their office looking at a large version of the map displayed on the wall. The blank space no longer seemed empty or ominous. It looked peaceful, a quiet place where beings who had earned their rest could live undisturbed. Sothil visited one day. The old archivist looked at the map and smiled. "You did well. This is better than hiding the truth. Knowledge with context prevents fear." "I hope so," Zethar said. "But there will always be species who don't believe it, who think they're special or different or smart enough to challenge the boundary." Perhaps Sothil agreed, but now they'll make that choice with full knowledge of the consequences. That's all we can do. Teach the truth and hope wisdom prevails. Years passed. Zethar became one of the foremost experts on human history and culture. They gave lectures, wrote papers, and advised the council on matters relating to the human boundary. It was meaningful work preventing conflicts before they could begin. Sometimes late at night, Zethar would pull up the coordinates Sarah had sent. They would study them, wondering what existed at those exact points in space. What would they find if they traveled there? What would they see? The question haunted them, but in a gentle way, like wondering what lay beyond the horizon while being content with the view from where they stood. More time passed. A century, then two. Zethar lived longer than most Veronians thanks to medical technology humans had shared with the Concordance. It was ironic. They thought that beings who had transcended death were helping other species live longer. On their 200th birthday, Zethar made a decision. They requested an extended leave from the council and booked passage on a small ship. They loaded the coordinates into the navigation system. It was time to see what lay beyond the map. The journey took 3 weeks. As they approached human space, automated beacons warned them they were entering restricted territory. But when Zethar transmitted the authorization code Sarah had provided, the warnings changed to welcomes. A small human ship appeared to escort them. The pilot was friendly, chatting casually about the weather on nearby colony worlds. They seemed genuinely happy to have a visitor. Zethar was guided to a planet near the coordinates Sarah had provided. From orbit, it looked like paradise. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds, cities that blended seamlessly with natural landscapes. It could have been Earth or any of 1,000 garden worlds. They landed at a small spaceport where Sarah Chen was waiting. She looked exactly as she had 200 years ago. Unchanged, eternal. "You came," she said, smiling warmly. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I," Zethar admitted. "But I had to know. What do you do with all this power? What do you do with eternity?" Sarah gestured at the landscape around them. "Come, let me show you." Over the next weeks, Zethar saw the truth of human civilization. They visited cities where billions lived in peace, pursuing art and science and philosophy. They saw gardens that stretched for hundreds of miles, maintained by communities who found joy in cultivation. They met humans who had lived for thousands of years, each finding new passions and purposes as centuries passed. They visited workshops where humans experimented with reality itself, creating new forms of matter and energy. They saw archives where every piece of human history was preserved in perfect detail, accessible to anyone who wanted to learn. They attended performances of music and theater that lasted days, created by artists who had centuries to perfect their craft, and everywhere they saw contentment. Not the stagnation of a species that had given up, but the peace of beings who had found what they wanted and were satisfied with it. "This is what we chose," Sarah explained as they stood overlooking a city at sunset.